Welcome to the very first episode of Althing Considered. I am Lauren,
And my name is Ben Kowalsky-Grahek.
and let's get this started. And today we're talking about community. All right. So for those of you who don't know who we are, this is my return, I guess, really to streaming. I'm Lauren Crow. I host the Heathen History podcast, and I used to do this little thing called Heathen Talk, which was really kind of the first streaming heathen show that existed back in the Dark Ages when dinosaurs roamed the earth. Because I'm old, so. In addition, I am president of the Troth, the world's largest inclusive heathen organization, and also the oldest international organization. And that basically means I am the chief cat herder. That is why Freya is the patron goddess of leaders of organizations.
Very true. Hey, and my name is Ben Kowalsky-Grahek. As I said before, I'm the communications director for the Troth, and I am psyched to be here. Usually Lauren is on with another Ben, with her Heathen History podcast, but today she's on with Benny, the ever so slightly younger.
Not to be confused with Benny the Elder, who is in fact an elder of our organization, which gets really confusing. But we will probably... older. Yeah, we will probably have him on at some point, though, because the great thing about Benny the Elder is he's my kindred brother. I know where he lives and can go twist his arm real hard. So that always works. Maybe I can talk him into it when we're doing a kindred retreat in a few weeks. Maybe I can talk him into it during that. But so tonight we are talking about community, and community is, I think, one of the things that really gets misconstrued in our religion. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Some of them have to do with everyone's least favorite author, Groenbech. Some of that has to do with, of course, I would say misunderstanding, but I don't think that's the correct word, misconstruing the sagas and the Eddas and the stories to put forward political points rather than the actual stories they tell. And some of it is just baggage and carryover from other religions, because let's be honest, to bring up a point from my old show, even if you weren't raised Christian, you were probably raised Christian, especially if you were raised in the US or Canada. So I think those three are very strong points that we will touch on. But I think first thing, Ben, in your mind, as a heathen, what does community mean to you?
I've been thinking about this before the show, and I still haven't come up with a complete answer for what community is. My community, as I define it, it used to be very influenced by, and we're going to get into this, by the Groenbech model of Innengard and Utangard, which we will get into. But what I've trying to apply that model to my life just didn't work out because of all the circles that I move into and move out. So, like, for example, I have my home community. That's my wife, my child, my immediate family. And then I have my neighbors, my friends, my city that I live in, St. Paul, Minnesota, that I'm involved in multiple nonprofits and volunteer organizations. Where I work is a community as well. To me, community has such a broad meaning, but it also has a sense of, I would say, a place where one belongs, where one feels the sense of belonging. And by place, I don't necessarily mean like a physical place where they belong, but an emotional or relational state where you feel belonging.
I think to community, it's important to me, and well, speaking of Benny the Elder, I'm going to go back to some points that he brought up, because he and I actually had this conversation back in the COVID-19 immunizations were first coming out, and the organization was asked for a quote on what our policies were about vaccinations. And to me, because everyone we interact with, we to some degree, shape, or form is part of our community.
Mm.
So even the girl who checks you out at the Kroger, I live in Arkansas, sorry, it's the Kroger. The guy, the man who is our nighttime security guard that I see every evening when I leave work. The crossing guard that I see every morning going to work at the elementary school by my office. I don't know these people more than maybe a name, but they are still part of my community. And I think that is a huge part of it, because I share no matter how small or how large, I share in this place with them. And then when you kind of move the larger thing, then it becomes, I share this state with a whole bunch of people, right? Or this city. And so to them, that is my community, because when I go and vote, my actions are going to affect them. Neighbors, and in the country, it's the same way. You have to look even at the world. There is that. Now, does that mean that everyone acts and behaves that way? No. But I do feel that that's the way we have to act. Now, do I have stronger obligations to some people than other people? Of course. That's just life, right? And that comes down to oaths and everything else. But in some degree, shape, or form, you could argue that everything, to some degree, is your community, and you have an obligation to some way. And it's certainly an argument. It's certainly an argument that we can have about the information of the Innengard and Utangard, and how that affects and enforces racism and tribalism, which, quite frankly, tribalism has really become the new, what we used to call soft folkism, right? Like, it's still racist, but it's not in your face. It's like I guess they can be that, but really you should, not. And tribalism seems to have become the new kind of what we used to call soft folkism back when I joined, came even like 20 years ago. I do think that is an issue, especially when we look at the people who draw those very strong lines about who is in the inner circle and the outer circle. And that's when you start to develop cliques and poisonous groups. And I do think that these very strong ideas about who's in and who's out can lead to what they used to kind of refer to everything as cults. To me, the better term for it is high control groups where you are expected to toe the line 100%, and if you don't, you become rejected, either socially or flat out kicked out of the group. And that is a problem across all religions. That's not just a heathen issue or a pagan issue. You see that everywhere. And so I do think that there's something to be said about how community, or lack thereof, does affect people's vulnerabilities to high control groups as well.
I want to get back to something you said, just to rewind a little bit. You talked about the pandemic being as almost a metaphor for community, and that was actually what shattered my initial kind of very insular thought of what community was, because up until that pandemic, I did not realize just how many of my actions can affect other people. As you said, the clerk at the grocery store, as you call it, the Kroger, the people you pass by every day, the decision that they make to come into work that day or not come into work that day, the decision they make to wear a mask or not wear a mask, the decision they make or the decision that you make to do that. A virus puts all of that into a highly contagious virus, puts all of that into very, very stark terms. as to how important all those decisions are and how those little decisions can impact someone. So let's say I don't, say I have COVID. I don't right now, but let's say I did. Let's say I go out. Let's say I make a big old sneeze, don't cover my mouth, and just sneeze all over everybody. My action right there has just affected everyone in that area around me, who then goes home to their wife and kids, and or there's their family, and spreads it to them, and then they spread it to them. So it put into very stark terms and deadly terms in some cases, just how much impact our day-to-day decisions have, and then what that means for a community. Like, does a community mean anyone who is impacted by my decisions? Am I in community with them? And the answer has been, yeah, in some way I am in relation to them, because the decisions I make affect them, whether that's the very literal metaphor of putting on a mask or getting a vaccine or whatever it is, taking those actions, or the actions of voting, the actions of influencing politics. That's another way that I affect someone else's life. I'm in relation to them in some way. So that really changed because I was actually quite tribalistic before that happened, and then afterwards it just very much blew up. That model made no sense to me anymore after that, considering. And I know that there was a reaction the other way too, where people denied that they had any kind of responsibility for this. They became more atomized, and they looked at it as, no, I'm not responsible for any of this stuff, and I hate it. they reject it completely, and then they seek out experiences and media that confirm that no, you're not responsible. It's not your fault. This doesn't really exist, because it is freaky, right? To think that the littlest things you do can affect so much.
And I think I want to read what we actually said as an organization. Because I think this kind of ties into heathen ethics. Heathen ethics often focuses on making good weird, or the fate that comes from the choices that one makes. However, this cannot be done in isolation. Our weird and the weird of individuals that are twined together in an incomprehensible and vast weave, and each of us can only see a fragment of the pattern. Absolute independence, living for oneself and only for oneself, is either right or wrong. It's impossible. And that is the thing. It's impossible. Making choices that protect others is the one way we can build good weird for ourselves and our community. And I wrote that in conjunction with Ben Waggoner, who, if you don't know, is the author of Our Troth, the main author of Our Troth, Volume 1 through 3, along with a lot of other books that we have for the Troth, Kindred Brothers well. He and I wrote those together. And so I think that that's very important to mention. I'm going to put this out that, and I think that that comes down to a lot of other things. And I will say that I think that mind shift, right? So I was raised fundamentalist, evangelical Christian, very, very fundamentalist, on the most extreme end that you can be. And part of that is a very individualistic outlook, right? Like, there's that outlook of your relationship with Jesus. It's very libertarian minded. And the moment I knew that I was really heathen, right? Like, I knew that my brain was really heathen, is when my mindset had really switched to a more community oriented mindset. Am I perfect? No. But when my thought processes became more about community and less about myself, that is definitely when my brain, I knew in my mind, oh, hey, I think I have embraced heathenry internally on a level that I haven't before. And that takes time. I mean, it took me over 10 years. So it's not something that's going to happen overnight with most people, especially if you were raised like I was.
Yeah, and I think American culture certainly contributes to that. And that you mentioned libertarian, ideal. I also was a libertarian too. I'm not anymore. I'm still recovering. But yes, that's that impetus to say, like, I'm taking care of me. I'm taking care of the that atomic unit, either myself and me and mine. Right. I think that was the way that it was put to me before, when I was really into the tribalism stuff. Was like, you take care of you and yours. I'll take care of me and mine, and we don't need to worry about anything else. But everything, but I pause for a second on that, because it seemed to me, and especially with the pandemic, what affects me and mine, what affects you and yours, are both upstream from us, right? So the decisions that I make, that I make in the voting booth, that then elect politicians that then make decisions for the way a road is going to be built, or the way a sidewalk's going to be built, or the way where a crosswalk goes in, can affect the way that our built environment is. So if for example I vote for a politician who cuts a bus line, or a bus stop, or cuts funding to buses, and that gets rid of a bus stop that someone used to use to get to work, well, now they have to go an extra 30 minutes, 15 minutes to get somewhere, then they're late to work, and then they lose their job. And then, as all of these things that eventually affect someone, start with a decision that you make that you might not know the consequences of. And that's part of the community mindedness, and really thinking down the road of what's the best outcome that we can hope for people, for that peace and plenty that we talk a lot about, that we pray for.
And it's been very interesting, because if you
Lauren,
look at the
your
history,
volume's off.
oh. Well, I don't know how I did that. Can you hear me now?
You're still off. I cannot hear you. Well, Lauren figures out now. Haha! And now the program is mine. I'll wait for Lauren to figure out the microphone issue, but I'm looking at a couple comments on the side here. Boosting my volume. Oh, thank you for the excellent points. You can hear both. Okay, I can't hear Lauren for some reason.
So it's you, not me.
Oh, Lauren, you can continue to talk. I just can't.
Okay.
I plain can't hear you.
Ben can't hear me. Please forgive us. It's our first time, literally. So one of the things that I think that I kind of want to talk about with here, and Ben has heard the episode, so he can catch up later, is that Norse mythology has been leveraged to promote this very individualistic ideals, especially the ideals of manifest destiny, rugged individualism, as well as the ideas of rugged individualism, as well as the ideas of colonialism since the 19th century. You go back to issues, and you'll go in here and you'll start talking about these Northern scholars that started out in the 18th and 19th centuries, specifically, and I apologize, I'm actually looking at heathen history notes from like an episode we did 2 years ago, but you have Samuel Lang and all these other people who started doing these things. So then that led up to Thomas Carlyle's On Heroes, Hero Worship, and Heroic Histories. And what these books did was basically try to give, especially the British, but also this kind of carries into Scandinavia and other areas, this idea that it was their divine right as the descendants of the Vikings to be able to do all these things. And Viking men were rugged individualists, and they were these basically what they did is they took the ideals of the 19th and 18th centuries, and they grafted them on top of the actual stories. So it wasn't what the stories were teaching. It was in fact what the it wasn't really what the stories were teaching. What they were actually doing was putting their own values on top of there. So when we start looking at this is the danger of trying to define community and morals and ethics your way and projecting it on history, right? Which we're seeing even now, because then you have people using still today our gods and our religious beliefs to harm others, as using these same ideas that were projected starting back, in the 1700s. In fact, one of the things they used to justify the continual colonialism, especially in India, in the Victorian era, was saying that Queen Victoria was in fact a descendant of Odin. They were saying that she was directly tied back to Odin in her lineage. Therefore, she had divine right to be this conqueror, and for this, what they were doing in India when it was being criticized. And they start saying these things about, I'm going to quote Thomas Carlyle here back, and this is from 1841. And he basically says, I believe these old Northmen were looking at nature with open eyes and soul, earnest, honest, childlike, manlike, simplest depth, freshness, true, loving, admiring, unfearing, a right, valiant, true race of old men. Now, keep in mind, when they say race, at this point in time, race was defined by your language group more than your skin color in Europe. Different in America, but in Europe, just to give it some context. But you go in here to Robert Ballantyne, who starts talking about the Norse in your blood, and we have good reason to regard their memory and respect with gratitude, despite their faults and sins, much as what is good and true in our laws and social customs, of our intense love of freedom and fairness, pith and pluck, enterprise, justice, all come from the rugged old sea kings of Norway.
All I can say is you're welcome. You're welcome, everybody, for all that good old gumption and that genetic material. Woohoo!
But you also, I don't have the outline on this computer, but you also see that same thing when you start seeing you see the same framing in the US towards expansionism. Basically, there's this idea, and why it permeates heathen communities so much is because part of I'm going to throw this out here. A lot of the reason that we have in the heathen community this sentiment of individualism, ruggedism, everything else comes back to anti-Catholicism movements in the 19th century and 18th century. In the US especially, they were very anti-Columbus. So you had, I believe it was Longfellow, who did an anti-Columbus book. And then that's where you start having the push for Leif Erikson Day.
Wasn't Longfellow that came up with the Skål to the Northland Skål?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And so basically what you have is this huge backlash against Catholic immigrants, right? Who weren't seen as white, by the way, until they needed them in the Civil War. Scandinavians weren't seen as white until they needed them in the Civil War either, but that's a whole other thing. And so you have all of this basically was baked in as an anti-Catholic and kind of genetic and like a legacy that because we are the descendants of Vikings, we have the right to claim all this land and run the indigenous peoples off. Like, this is all baked in to our history. The misuse of our faith is baked into the history of the United States and Canada, and really into the history of Europe. It's, people talk about what's happening now, but it's been happening for centuries. And this greatly affects now how we perceive ourselves as heathen and how we define community, because you have Groenbech, you have all of these other authors who have basically so deeply used their own politics to define what people believed, that it really hasn't been until the last 25, 30 years that we've had good scholarship on what was actually going on, other than a few, the great Ellis Davidson. I mean, that's probably, but for the most part, most scholarship gave very wrong ideas. So people had the wrong idea. Let's put that out there first. How we define community has been wrong in a great deal because we've been wrong because the scholarship has been wrong.
Yeah, I think that also belies an underlying point about having a faith inspired by scholarship versus a faith that is dependent on scholarship. So the idea that used to be that Reconstructionists, so as most people, I don't know if you had explained this in the unfortunate time that I couldn't hear you about the Reconstructionist using these scholarly sources like Groenbech to tell people that this is the historic way of the Vikings. This tome lays it out for you. Then finding out later on that Groenbech really was just doing a literary survey of Germanic literature, and he was doing his own interpretation based on that. And I always find it very funny when the same people who claim, "Oh, you're imposing the present on the past, and you're bringing political ideologies into it, looking at the past, and you need to read Groenbech and Culture of the Teutons for a more pure look at how things were." And what someone's telling me there is that their value system aligns a lot more with Groenbech than it does with scholarship of today or the values of today.
So
in my view, I think it's impossible for someone who is either Reconstructionist or revivalist to not have to not interpret the past through a modern lens. There is no other lens. I can't take off my life. Right? I can't take off my life. I can't take off I can't take off the way that I've learned how to process things, and I don't think anyone really can. Despite what Robert Heinlein seems to believe in, Stranger from a Strange Land, you can't just learn another language and change your whole worldview. It's still there, and I'm still reading myself into these old texts the same way that Groenbech was reading his day and age into those old texts. That's what he was doing then. That's what I'm doing now.
So I want to talk a minute about Groenbech's background, because I think that will give a lot more clarity into his ideas. So first of all, Groenbech's actual academic background was in Turkish language. He had no academic background in Old Norse language or literature. Second, he was actually seen as a competent and amazing scholar and nominated for Nobel Prize in Literature for his studies on Indian mystics, Jesus, and ancient Greece. Those are areas where he was actually seen as a very competent scholar. However, his peers, as well as modern scholars, he's kind of the, and for any of you familiar with Wicca, he is kind of the
Margaret Murray.
Margaret Murray of Norse stuff. Same era too. But no one in the academic fields took his work seriously. And still today, no one does. And his biggest gift, in my opinion, was not his academic writing. His biggest gift, in my opinion, was his gift was his writing style, because he has a way. And if you have read I have read all of the volumes of Culture of the Teutons. I have, because I too was heavily influenced by 2010's heathenry. Just go watch Heathen Talk. It's cringe.
Oh, yes.
The thing is that his writing makes you feel like he was there. It makes you feel like you're there. And that is very persuasive and, dare I say, manipulative for the reader. And it's very easy to read that and then be convinced, right, that this is what's actually happening.
Yeah,
He is a master of language.
I also, there's other people who are similar, like, so his background, I believe, was in what they called philology, right? Philology is the study of classics.
Yes.
Philology broke off into many different disciplines. There actually are still groups that teach like there are still schools that will teach philology as like a study of classic or ancient literature. Another particular philologist who I always think of when I read Groenbech, because they have similar styles, is Friedrich Nietzsche. Both of them have incredibly bombastic prose and they just kind of say stuff that makes you, that just is like a gut punch, and you just kind of accept it. it is borderline, as you say, it's manipulative in a way, but it's a stylistic thing. Like, these guys both have a talent for analysis. I think that they were really good readers, but they were also really talented writers. And that's part of why I think that Groenbech's work captured so many imaginations and still does to this day. I mean, I still know people who swear on the Church of Groenbech, and and every single year you've got philosophy students doing a paper on Nietzsche. Like, I did it. When I was in college, had my Nietzsche phase. But everyone gets into this because the style, it's not necessarily just the thought, but the style is so captivating.
And I will say, Groenbech was heavily influenced by a few people who I think are important to talk about, like Innengard Groenbech, who was a Scandinavian nationalist. I mean, many of the people who influenced his work were nationalists. They were not great people. And Groenbech also was, I think there's some racism involved in what Groenbech did. And why do I say this? Because Groenbech was one of those people who believed every religion was inherently the same and wanted to try to distill everything down to the core truths that every religion shared. And in my opinion, it's very similar to the people who try to distill down, every shamanism is the same, or everything is that, and everything. To me, there is a definite level of exoticism and racism there, because in his other works, which I've read, unfortunately, he does some comparison with research other people did, contemporaries of his, on Aboriginal tribes in Australia, African tribes, and trying to say essentially all of these polytheistic tribal religions are the same. Basically, it all comes down to trying to distill down to all of these religions are essentially Christianity with different covers, and a lot of his other work. So I do feel that there's some issues with that. He basically was very focused, like a lot of, and that was a thing with his contemporaries. So it's not just him. There were other authors doing this, really wanted to boil down the essence of every religion to the same core concepts. So it's definitely something that I find, and also there were some issues where he was trying to talk about religion where it was ennobling, and there was also this romanticism about simpler times and people who didn't live with this. You have to think, this is the rise of, really the first rise of technology. We have a lot in common with this time frame, in the sense that they romanticize these pure older times. For us, you see a lot of people romanticizing the 1950s, when, it was a simpler time or whatever. For these people, they were romanticizing the Vikings, as a simpler, purer, natural time when people were more connected to nature. And I do feel like you get a lot of that in people who join in to heathenry. So let's talk about Innengard and Utangard and why the concept sucks.
Yeah, so we got the background as to who came up with this idea. Yes,
I actually have the section pulled up from Culture of the Teutons. I can read it real quick.
I appreciate that. Yes, read on if you couldn't use in Danish. Thank you.
I know, thank you. No, I don't want to upset our Danish friends. Where people meets people or tribe meets tribe, they are not men-filled surfaces cut across by a political or linguistic line. The two circles have an earthly boundary between them, but this line of demarcation is only the upper edge of their mutual contact. Below it stands friendship and enmity, intercourse and feud, with all the shades that the character of honor and luck gives to these relationships. For one himself, a soul, regards the others as souls. Friends are not something outside of him, their self, their honor, their work. Their forefathers enter into him as part of his nature. And the others again possessed him and his, not as tributary or subject, but as contents of honor. Each people, larger or smaller, according to intensity of intercourse, is the world, its folk takes up the earth, partly inhabited land, partly wasteland, and fills it out to its farthest bounds. Our folk is Middlegarth and that which lies beyond Utangard.
You that even while you're reading that, I can. It's almost like flowing over. It's almost like flows over you, doesn't it?
Yes, it's
dear listener, doesn't it? Doesn't it just? It's very easy to get wrapped up in, and I can even feel myself going like, oh yeah, that sounds nice. I mean, it is certainly poetic, and it certainly it betrays a kind of person who does a lot of reading of classics, but unfortunately, as a model, it fails to grasp, understand, and even help us interpret modern relationships and modern life, or even to help us really understand and navigate the literature itself and the complexities therein.
So let's talk about first, what is Innengard and Utangard, the actual linguistic concept, right? So Ben, what is Innengard? Do you know?
Innengard is the me and mine. It's the land of home,
familiarity. No, I'm talking about the actual linguistic, like the actual. What is
Innengard? It just means inner yard.
Right. So if you've ever been to like a farm, right? So the inner yard would be like the home and like the areas that are fenced off where you would keep your domesticated animals closer to the house, the barn, the house, the area where you would keep your animals at night. The Utangard would be the pastures, the areas that you keep but are more wild, that are still fenced in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the way out there, like the wild, where people are kicked to be like terrible people. So that is the idea, is basically Innengard is me. So people take that to a social meaning. Innengard are the people you are, me and mine, your immediate family, your kindred, like the people that you see as like your clique. That's the best way. It's like high school, right? The Innengard would be the people you eat lunch with, your table. That's your clique. And whereas everyone else is the Utangard. But the wilds, the outer wilds, would be that school you hated, your rival school.
We don't go there. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't go to Augusta. We don't go to Augusta. They're terrible. Go Jaguars.
It's the place. It's the place where that girlfriend that I have goes, that you've never met and you never will meet. Right.
Canada.
She's from Canada.
But that's a great way to like metaphor it, I guess, for you guys, that is how it works. So I think so what does that create when it comes to heathenry? Well, one, it becomes a thing where you become selfish, in my opinion. I think it creates selfishness. I mean, Ben, I never fully internalized these ideas. I'm not going to lie. I kind of tried, but it never rang very true to me because I was the kid who got in trouble at apologetics conferences when I was raised fundy Christian, and I actually had a decent youth pastor that had us doing a ton of community service work, so this didn't always make sense to me. So Ben, I'm going to let you talk a little more about when you believed this, how did you apply this in life?
It was uncomfortable, to put it mildly. I'm also deeply community-minded person, and to think to myself that the way I used to relate it was I used to talk a lot about Dunbar's number, which is the number of relationships that a human being can reasonably keep in their lives. And I thought, okay, well, Dunbar's number limits us. And Dunbar's number is not a law or anything. It's an observation, by social scientists. That there's a limited number of intimate social relationships that a person can have in their lives. I think it's about 150 is the total that you're going to have. And thinking of it in terms of 150, because that would be about the size of a tribe, right? That would be about the size of a village that one would be in, and then thinking that as sort of a primordial essence of who we are, and it's unnatural to force ourselves into situations where we would have to care about more than who's closest to us, who's most proximal, who's most local. That is unnatural for us to do, because we are meant to have such tight, enclosed social relationships. Also, one of the things that became very odd was really starting to negotiate relationships with people, almost contractually, in a way of almost like, I think one guy put it that I used to listen to very frequently. He used to say, the stranger is a potential threat, not a potential friend. Is supposed to be regarded as a potential threat, and you're supposed to regard them with suspicion unless proven otherwise, and negotiate their relationship and negotiate their coming into your community, which leads to, as you probably know, about institutions like the Thralldom institution, which is now, I believe, more like a guild system. But those kinds of assumptions about how human relations are supposed to proceed, that directly leads to institutions like, well, you have to worth your way in. You have to prove yourself to this community before we can allow you those kinds of intimate relationships that we ideally want to have. So that was how I ended up getting into it. And those were sort of the resultant beliefs, is I really did start to believe that that Thralldom was a good idea, because heck, I need to get, it was put, the way it was put to me was like, we just need to get to know you, right? We just need to get to know you a little bit. Make sure you're right. Make sure you're right for this community. That wasn't quite what it was. And it was only later that I ended up finding out that no, there's more to it. There's quite a bit more to Thralldom and to the worldview that allows an institution like that not only allows for, sorry, I shouldn't even say allows, that necessitates an institution like Thralldom. It has to exist by one name or the other. Either you call it Thralldom, or you call it a guild, or you call it something. The institution of worthing someone into the community that they are a potential threat that has to be made, remade into a community member is necessary when you approach heathenry from that particular perspective.
Well, that just sounds like an anxiety disorder. And I know things. I have an anxiety disorder.
It's yeah. I mean, it produces anxiety in me. And I'm a very extroverted person. I'm a person who likes having, multiple different kinds of friends all over the world. But the idea that I needed to really, what it seemed to me that Innengard and Utangard did was like sorting my friendships and my relationships into these very strict categories of people, and starting to wonder, okay, is this person in my Innengard or my Utangard? Do I need to negotiate my relationship with them or what? And I remember the one of the first holes in the dam was trying to explain it to my wife, or sorry, the woman who would become my wife, trying to explain it to her, and her just looking at me going like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean? And it made perfect sense to me at the time. And if you accept the basic premises, of course it does. All of it makes sense. But you'd have to accept those basic premises as being both a valid and a good interpretation to have of our faith, a good reconstruction of a faith tradition, we'll say.
Now, I do want to point out, a lot of kindreds do have a a time period before you fully join.
Mhm.
And I will say that is, my kindred does this, and I find this reasonable only because to us, it's not about us evaluating whether you should join. It's a two-way street, right? But at the same time, we don't treat you any differently, right?
Mhm.
We don't treat you any differently except for when we have like legally binding business meetings, right? That's the only thing
Yeah.
we don't, and it's not unlike with trust membership. You have to be a member for a full year before you're allowed to vote. But we always say it's like an engagement, right? And in an
Mhm.
engagement, either party can end it, and it's for both parties to figure out if this is the right place to be. I think that's really an important thing to think about. And I will say one of the other parts of Innengard and Utangard that really can damage people and has happened to me, and you witnessed this back in 2016, is to quote Heidi Klum on Project One Way, yeah, I can talk runway. One day you're in, and the next day you're out.
Yes.
And for no logical reason, whoever is the quote unquote leader will suddenly decide someone is not cool anymore. And this is where Innengard and Utangard leads to high control groups, right?
Mhm.
It leads to huge problems.
Yeah, I mean,
It leads
because
to, yeah.
it does lead to high control environments, and it necessarily has to because of the worthing process to come in, right? If everyone who comes from outside comes in as worthless, then there is no there is no way that the person, so there's always a person who's kind of like at the top deciding whether or not to accept somebody who has the top worth, who holds all that worth, right? Who holds the luck, right? Who holds the fate and the reputation of the group in their hands. And it necessarily has to be that way if you internalize all those concepts. So I understand uh, where these guys are coming from because I understand where they've, the fundamental pillars upon which that rests. I hear a lot of criticism these days about let's say like Thaydish belief, where from people who don't actually understand it, and it tends to kind of become more of like a point and laugh at those people kind of a thing. Whereas when I look at it, I think, how could you have ended up any differently given where you started, right?
Whereas, yeah,
Given the inputs, how can I then say, these outputs, I'm going to point and laugh at the outputs, when when I sometimes look at the inputs as being things that I see other heathens talking about. um for example, the importance of the web of oaths. Like, this is something that we internalize. Most heathens have probably internalized. This is another part of that. It's another pillar upon which all this stuff rests.
I will say though, having experienced something similar, right? So I was in a sorority in college,
Yeah,
and
sorority. That's good.
some of
That's
the
good.
concepts are very similar as far as you go through they no longer call it a pledge, they call it a new member period, but there's hazing, there's a
Yes.
mistreatment, and the
Hmm.
idea being that you are earning your place, and because we went through this, you have to go through this.
Yes.
Um, and it becomes a very abusive thing because people feel like if they were abused, it's a cycle of abuse essentially. These kind
Well,
of
they would
things
say
do lead.
ordeal, right? It's not abuse. It's ordeal.
Well, I'm
Um,
speaking specifically about
sororities.
specifically about sororities,
Okay.
right? Because I've been inside of it, whereas I've not been inside of Theodism, so I
Mhm.
only know the stories from people who've left. I'm speaking specifically from my experience with sororities. It leads to a cycle of abuse.
Right.
And eventually you end up with someone dead, which has happened in several
Yeah.
sororities. Um, and I think a lot of times the ordeal thing, and you see the ordeal thing not just in, you see it in some northern tradition groups. You see this ordeal
Yeah.
concept, and it often can relate back to SA. It can relate back to, I will never forget reading something that someone wrote that was basically that Odin chose you to be essayed, that ordeal. And,
Yes.
it's high control and but it all tends back into our desire for community and the needs
Yes.
a lot of us have to feel special and feel like we
acceptance.
really belong.
Belonging.
And because there is this, many of us have this experience in one way, shape, form, or another, whether it was joining a team, joining a club, joining a sorority that has some sort of new member, hazing, whatever. A lot of times we don't see that as wrong, right? I guess that's a good way to put it. Like, I think back, I don't know that I would have, and my younger self would have recognized that as wrong.
No,
And
in our culture, someone teaches us to expect it, especially from sororities or fraternities, fraternal organizations, that there is going to be some kind of hazing or ordeal process that you simply have to put up with it in order to belong. That belonging exacts a price, and that's part of what we're acculturated with to some degree, that we expect. And in some ways, in some deeper, darker parts of ourselves, in some ways we actually want the feeling of the ordeal is, having overcome the ordeal is an accomplishment, right? It starts you off with this feeling that you overcame something, right? That you pushed past it, and now you're part of this group who shares that same trauma, or let's say trauma, or same ordeal. You overcame that, right? All together. You're all in this together.
Trauma bonding.
Trauma bonding is a thing. It's a real thing. But it's also the people who inflicted the trauma who are now bonding with you over the trauma. So that's another thing entirely. But you're right. It does relate to this idea of community and what it means to belong and what the cost of belonging is. And there are some groups out there still to this day who would say, like, look, if you're not paying a cost to get in, you don't really belong anywhere. Like, and there is an appeal to that. There's a certain amount of appeal to that argument, to that statement. Like, if you putting skin in the game, investment, right?
And I think it's one of those things where, like, within the communities I'm a part of, there's, in those communities, especially the high control communities, and I have been a part of a high control pagan community. When I was younger, before I became heathen, I was Wiccan. I joined a coven when I was 19. That everything ended horribly. I won't go into that story, but needless to say, the cops got involved. That's how bad it was. Good side was I ended up making a friend that was a friend of mine until she passed a few years ago. But I think that it's important for us to be aware of this, be aware that these groups are there, because a lot of times the people who end up in these groups because they are the most vulnerable among us. They are the people who are struggling. And right now, for those of you who aren't aware, I work in public health. And therefore I deal with a lot of public health data. We are in the midst of a global mental health pandemic, in addition to everything else. And there are a lot of people who really are desiring and need that community. And so people who are less than ethical are preying on them. And to me, one of the big danger signs is if anyone tries to insist that, number one, they are the only person you should listen to, or that they are that they should demand who and what you like or dislike, who is in, who is out, who you should socialize, et cetera, you have to question their motives. Because, I mean, I would know, I will give you my opinion on someone. I will absolutely tell you what I know about somebody, but at the end of the day, you have to make that decision. And I know, even in our kindred, we disagree about people. Believe me, I have friends who have friends that I can't stand, but that's their decision, not mine. And I'm not going to try to, even though I lead my kindred, I'm not going to tell anyone in my kindred what to do, because that's too much work, number one. That's a lot of work
for one swimbo.
Yeah, exactly. I have only invoked my she who must be obeyed powers twice, and that led to my kindred brother finding a wife and having a kid. So, and that's over 20 years. So twice over 20 years, that's not really power hungry, I don't think.
No, I also think that communities can start with really good intentions. It's not merely people who are, because I think there's a temptation when we think about communities that go bad, that it must have been because this person was manipulative and evil from the start, from the get. And that's kind of the line that we're fed from the media that we see about things like cults. I remember watching something, and I remember watching something on you grow up learning about Jonestown, right? And you hear about how this is so, and then you hear about the beginnings of that movement and how it was this multicultural, multi-ethnic, like that this guy that Jim Jones was a crusader for equal rights and human rights. And you go, how did you end up here? So you can start from a place of really wanting justice, and from a place of really wanting to form a community based on good principles, and still end up in a place where you're friends with somebody one day, and then all of a sudden all you can talk about is how terrible they are, and how really they were the worst person all along, right? How you really knew that this person was just terrible, and we should have never talked to them at all. They must have been terrible from the start. You end up with those kinds of situations just because
recency bias.
Well, it's sometimes how groups grow, and it's sometimes just the dynamics that end up happening within them. Unfortunately, even groups that start with really good principles. I think one of I still have contact with a few Theodish groups, and they challenge me on stuff. And one of the things they challenged me on, because I'm a very egalitarian person at the end of the day. I'm a very egalitarian. I believe that people should have equal rights, equal access, equal opportunities, and everyone should have an equal say and equal vote. A flat power structure, right, without a necessarily defined hierarchy. And one of the challenges that was put to me, and this is actually on to the Troth website, actually, was if you're not defining a hierarchy, one is just going to happen to you, right? If your group has no defined hierarchy, then it's just going to happen. And everyone's going to look to one person or two people who are going to be the ones to make all the decisions. And you don't know how they got there, and you don't know how to get rid of them, right? You don't know how, if there's no way to vote them out, if there's no way to challenge a leadership structure with no defined hierarchies whatsoever, you are asking for a group where everyone's going to be looking to one or two people to make all the decisions, and there's going to be no way to challenge that. You're basically asking a hierarchy is either going to be intentional or it's just going to happen to you. There is no choice in the matter. It is always going to be the case that someone, not even because they want to, not even because they're seeking it out, not because they're power hungry or whatever, but it's just the nature of the beast where one or two people are just going to be in charge, unquestionably in charge.
And I agree with you there. But at the same time, usually the people who end up in charge when that happens are the people who show up and do the work.
Yes.
And that's what happens. I mean, and I know that from, I've been involved with community organizing, and I have been involved with that kind of stuff. And that's that's kind of how it works. It's usually just the people who show up and do the work and put in the labor. There's a theory on community dynamics that essentially 5% of the people do the planning, 15% of the people will come in and do the work with under that, the 5% that do the planning, and then 80% of the people just show up and expect the other 20% of the people to have everything done for them. And that's kind of how it happens I am, for hierarchy, to me, some groups do need a defined hierarchy, but that hierarchy is more about, I'm a big proponent of what's called service forward leadership, right? It's the idea that as a leader, you are there to serve the community, not lead them.
We have two big questions in our chat at the moment.
Yeah, I was kind of saving the one of them for later because it's not really a part of the conversation right now. I was kind of I starred one of them for later because I figured that one's more of a, we could get to that one in a little bit.
It is about communities.
It is, but it's not about community. And so I figure we can get to that one towards the end. I do think that it is important, though, to discuss. So let's talk a bit about, we've talked a lot about like bad communities. Let's talk a bit about healthy communities and what is one of the good, I think, important things here. So healthy communities, I think healthy communities are egalitarian for the most part. They may have some hierarchy, but that hierarchy is not dictative. It's not telling people what to do. It is about engaging the information. It is about engaging what the will of the community is. So for instance, I'll give an example from the Troth. We are kind of given the edict forward of this, we want this to happen. So it is the leadership's responsibility then to make it happen. The Troth, a bunch of members wanted Discord for the organization. So it was our job then to move forward and make that happen.
I also think that I tend to put in, I don't try and make something into something it isn't. So when I think of communities that are good, I think of, my neighborhood as a good community. That means something different to me than the Troth being a good community or my kindred being a good community. Do I feel, so for like my kindred that I've been a member of now for almost 20 years now, it's very much a close knit. We feel like chosen siblings, right? Like we feel like, we are in each other's lives. We care a lot about each other. It's also we don't have a hierarchy or anything like that. We never have. People tend to think Patty LaFile is in charge. She is not. She's very much she is just another, and it's a very small, intimate group of people. But I wouldn't ask of my kindred the same kind of asks that I would ask of a community like of a nonprofit community like the Troth, which is entirely different. And I have to stop thinking that, or maybe I had to stop thinking that what I would get out of a good kindred type community or a good family is the same thing I need to get out of a nonprofit. Or thinking that my family needs to have that same impact as well. Like there's no comparison between the two, and there shouldn't be. I think it's very healthy to have boundaries between, and not ask of our communities the same thing from each one, and the same kind of intimacy and the same kind of, almost like I often say that a good community is one in which you feel spiritually, emotionally nourished, and you feel a sense of belonging. You get a nourishment from that sense of belonging. And there's different kinds of nourishment out there. Different kinds of food that can nourish you, just like there are different kinds of communities that can nourish you. But when you are drawing that nourishment and feeling that sense of belonging, that to me is a sign of a good community. And externally, is that community making you better as a person? Do you feel like what you do matters? And do you feel like, are other people remarking like, wow, you're really becoming a better human being? Because we all can stand to be, right?
And, my kindred has a hierarchy, but it's pretty much strictly on paper because you have to have one for like paperwork to become a recognized organization. That's just how it works, right? Like you have to have a president, a secretary, and a treasurer. Otherwise, you can't register with the state of Arkansas. So technically, on paper, we have a hierarchy, but that hierarchy isn't really more than on paper because we do tend to make decisions by consent.
Mm-hmm.
It's just how we work. And I think that's an important thing to remember is that these things are, but I will say, I think to me, a healthy community, no matter what kind of community it is, especially when we're talking about religious communities, a healthy community, I agree, should nourish you, should make you a better person. A healthy community should also be something that isn't a give and a take, right? So like you give, it's something that should give to you, but you should also be giving to, right? If that makes sense, right? Like it should not be a one-way street. It should be reciprocal. And I think that a good community should be something that has that fills a purpose in your life. Whether that is, when you're talking about like a neighborhood association, that fills a purpose in your life. It builds your neighborly bonds. It builds safety in your neighborhood. I belong to a professional organization that fills a purpose in my life because it opens, I have networking, I have all of these different things that I can do, and it enhances my career. Even, larger communities like interfaith communities and stuff, those do really great things for us because they fulfill a specific purpose. And for me, the truth for me fulfills such a great purpose in my life because it gives me the opportunity to connect with other people. I've made so many amazing friends, and it's a community that fills a different position than a kindred does for me. My kindred is more like my family. I can barge in, there are not many Troth members that I feel like I could barge into their house unannounced and it would be okay. But I can barge into anyone in my kindred's house unannounced and they're just like, hey, what's up? I mean, they don't care. And I think that's a difference that is important to everyone, and I think that is very important. But I also think that one of the main things is community should never ask you to cut off other parts of your life, right? Um, and I'm going to speak now from my experience. I'm very open about this. This is something that if you see me interviewed in other places, I am an addict. I have 20 years of a little over 20 years of sobriety. I've been involved with 12-step programs. I'm currently involved with our own Heathens in Recovery program. And one of the issues I always ran into with 12-step programs was their need to force dependence on them and only them. And to me, that's a red flag, right? That's a red flag to me. If a group is trying to force their dependence on them and only them, like I said before, if they're saying they should be your only source of whatever, I think that is a huge issue and should be handled with kid gloves, right? It should be a red flag because a community should enhance your life, not restrict it. In the truth, no one cares if you're also a member of the ADF. No one cares if you're also a member of, I don't know, fill in the blank other organization that shares our values. Now, if you're also a member of like a racist organization, there's going to be problems, right? But if you're a part of the ADF, or you're a part of the Unitarian Church, or you're a part of the, SAG-AFTRA, whatever, there's no restricting and saying, well, you can't be friends with us if you're friends with them, because that's not healthy, right? It's not healthy for people to restrict like that. Now, if you're part of a group that does not reflect our values, yes, we will ask you to make a choice or leave. And that's simply because groups that promote hate aren't in alignment with our values. And having someone in your community who espouses those views by being a part of that organization makes your community a danger to others in that organization. So if you have someone in your organization who is a TERF, for instance, right?
Or
if we have someone,
for example.
Yeah, but a TERF is I was going to use a very kind of specific line of thought here. If someone is in the Troth who's a TERF, they're anti-trans. Well, we are a pro-trans organization. We have a lot of members who are trans. We have people on our board of directors who are trans. By allowing someone who is anti-trans on our organization, we are saying to our trans members, this is not a safe place for you. And that is, I think, very important line to draw. And I do think it is not, I think that's also a healthy community should not put up with bigotry and of any form, because that is not creating a healthy environment for anyone. Because
I agree.
Racism taints everything it touches. Bigotry taints everything it touches. And I know I'm dealing with it right now with the stuff going on in Delphi. So, yay.
I agree right on, and we identified some red flags before, but if you are entering, if you're part of a group, and that group, among the other things that it does for you, there's more of a constellation of good things rather than any single one star, right? You want to look to make sure everything's lining up. But if one of the things you might feel is you want to feel more confident going out into the world, that the world isn't a really good group, to me, makes the world seem less scary, not more scary. Like it enables you. It doesn't paralyze you, right? You feel like you have to. You feel like you can go out into the world. You can act in the world. You can be confident going out in the world because you have, people backing you up, or because you feel that nourishment, that good feeling from that community. So you realize you have a community backing you up. That is, to me, a sign of a good community that makes people feel more confident to do good work out there in the world. And I do want to, speaking of doing good work in the world, I do want to give a big ups to neighborhood organizations. They are one of the easiest ways for the pagans like myself to just walk in and start getting involved with helping to greet your neighbors and do politics on that very, very micro level, block level, rather than thinking that what you have to do is go down to City Hall and shake every hand in City Hall. You can start out just by going to that local neighborhood block club or that neighborhood association. Those institutions are some of the things that for us, it gets people food for Thanksgiving, right? Like, these are the institutions that neighbors come to depend on. So before, I'm not saying don't go down to City Hall and shake hands and kiss babies and whatever, certainly, but one of the easiest ways to get involved is just looking at block club. If that's something you're interested in, I highly recommend it.
Another really great option is getting involved with things like your local interfaith community. And I want to throw big props to all of our heathens that are super involved with that. I'll tell you, one of the best experiences I've had this year was being involved with Arkansas Peace Week. It was such a wonderful, wonderful time where we were able to be involved in all these great interfaith opportunities where, the Troth was the first pagan organization to be involved with Arkansas Peace Week. And we were able to host a ritual, and people who were not pagan came, and we were able to go to other events. I went to a wonderful interfaith dinner hosted by the Muslim community. These are things that are so important, and we don't talk enough about these really great events that, things that we can do that are very small. And I highly suggest maybe not running for New York City Council. Maybe that's something we don't do ever again.
That's a really big thing to do.
Yeah.
But Lauren, I would say that even just you go out in the world and you feel like you can be the only pagan in the room, because you and I both know what that feels like when we walk into a space, when we walk into an interfaith space, and we know we are the only pagan in the room. We know we're definitely the only heathen in the room, but we are the only pagan in the room. We are the only representation that heathenry has and that all of paganism has at that point to all of these other faith communities. And maybe they've heard something on the news, maybe they've seen a story or something like that, and they've already got some preconceptions of who we are and what we believe. We are having the confidence, and I think good organizations, good communities give you that confidence to be the only pagan in the room, because at the end of the day, you're not. You are part of something. You're part of a kindred. You're part of a community organization. You're part of a national organization. You're part of that. So feeling that confidence that you are indeed, there's a lot of imposter syndrome, I think, on my part, especially whenever I go into these kinds of spaces, that I am indeed supposed to be there and I have not walked into the wrong room. This is not a Wendy's. This is a interfaith gathering, and I'm welcome to talk about my faith here, and I'm welcome to and people want me to do that at that point, and that there is a seat at the table for us, and you can take that seat if you need to.
And that is so important. Like I can't stress that enough. Is I've done a ton of appearances recently talking with non-pagans about what heathenry and Odinism and Ásatrú is, because of what's happening with a murder case here in the US. And it's been wonderful to have that confidence that I know, and that comes from being a part of this organization, being a heathen, being a part of my kindred. Literally the day before I did the first interview, right? I am coming home. It's a Wednesday. I'm driving home from work, and I call my kindred sister and have a freak out on the phone driving home from work because I was nervous. That is community right there. That is me calling my kindred sister and going, I don't know what I'm doing. And then watching people from the Troth show up and watch that broadcast. It was one of their highest viewed broadcasts. And in the comments, supporting me, helping understand and explain things in the comments because I couldn't pay attention to everything. That is that's such a community. And the people that I have in my life that I love so much that I have met this organization. I know one of my best friends is Mary Antonelli. She's the treasurer of the Troth. I have met her face to face once. She is my best friend though, because she and I've gone through so much together, and we talk every day. We talk on the phone, we talk or chat or whatever, just about every day. And that's because of our experiences together through volunteering, through the things we've shared. And that's the thing. I think a good organization gives you experiences so that you can bond with other people, whether those experiences are things like events that you can go to, or they're volunteer opportunities, or they're just Friday night voice chats where everybody gets on and just shoots the shit. Or, we have our Frigga group has Tuesday night Stitch and Bitch. Where we sit and work on projects and talk about whatever's going on in our life. That to me, that's community. And most importantly, that's heathenry.
Yes. and it's really important to have, and I always look at it as things that people come to rely on, institutions that people come to rely on. And this is something in paganism that I find is frustrating in how we don't like organized religion. we don't want that. We don't want what we grew up with, the faith of our parents, that organized faith. And at the same time, I find so many people reaching out for, when I go to look at our website forums, people looking for a priest, people looking for so please, someone conduct my wedding. Please, someone help me name my child. Please, these community services, I would say, provided by institutions And it's hard for us, as a 35-year-old organization at this point to see ourselves now as this institution, but it has become one. If you do something for long enough and you become known for it and you become reliable at it, you become an institution. Whether you like it or not, people are going to look to you for something, or they're going to look, it's just going to happen. And you have to answer that call. So like, I was just thinking the other day, we have this heathen happy hour that my kindred brother Mike started back in the Northeast, when he would just go on Zoom during the pandemic. He just made a Zoom room and just would hang out all night with people, because they were so disconnected. And still 3 years later, over 3 years later, it's still going on. The Northeast still has that community going on, because so many people came to rely on it. Every Friday night, they'd know, hey, if I don't have plans Friday night, I can always jump on this call and just see who's around. And having that as now this institution, it's something people have come to really rely on and expect. And I think that's another important aspect of community that people can provide, that a community can provide for you, is things that you rely on every single day. I'd be, for my neighborhood organization, I'd be kind of angry if we didn't have our annual ice cream social and our annual fall harvest festival, our pie contest, right? Like these kind of, you might think of them as being like silly things, but they are the things that people time their lives by, that people set their watches to, right? Right on the calendar every single year. That you as a community provide that stability for people, that anchor of people's year, is critical, and a really good sign of a functioning community.
And I want to talk about one other thing that community can do, because I think this is one of the most important things, in my opinion, the Troth does. And that is, community can provide a way to pull people out of bad situations. We have a young man that lives here locally. He is heathen. He was imprisoned in his most vulnerable years in federal prison. I know where he was in Texas, and then where he was in Texas, there is a significantly large Odinist racist population. However, because of our organization and the letters that were written to him by, at the time, I think it was before our current in-reach director took over, but whoever wrote him letters at that time, and they also wrote letters to other people in that prison, they were able to form a small group of 3 inclusive heathens and create their own little insular community. And by working with and explaining to the chaplains there, listen, this is different. Like, this is sending these people to worship together would be like sending the Catholics and the Mormons to worship together. That's how I try to explain it to people, because it makes sense to them. And so they were able to form this, and they were able to stay out of the problems that come with being part of a prison gang, essentially, because of community. And that's so important. I recently went to a conference called Decarcerate, which is focusing on ending a lot of the huge issues in prisons in Arkansas. And one of the biggest things that I think the feedback from every former prisoner that we heard was the lack of community, and how people often turn to gangs and dangerous places because of the lack of community. And I did think that that was super important to talk about, is how community can actually save people. I live in an area where vulnerable young men are getting recruited into racist groups. I won't name them because I don't want to give them the publicity, but all you have to do is go look at Southern Poverty Law Center. It's pretty easy to figure out. And go look at NBC Outs. Got a whole documentary on one of the groups in my area, which is terrifying. And one of the ways that building strong communities where you are, or becoming a part and making a community stronger that is inclusive, that espouses actual heathen values is going to help make your area better. Even if it's not a heathen group, if it's a group that has heathen values. And I think that's, people, there are heathens that give me problems because the fact of the matter is most of the community work I do is with Christians. But I live in Arkansas. Who am I supposed to work with?
Right.
I absolutely have the best time working with the ecumenical Catholics, the Episcopalians, the Unitarians, the UCC, like all of these liberal churches that I share values with. There is no reason I shouldn't be working together with them to implement changes that we all agree on are things that are better for our community. Things like supporting our queer brothers and sisters, supporting our supporting changes in how we talk about race, how we talk about all of those things. Like, there's no reason that we shouldn't be working together. Quite frankly, their budgets are a lot better. They can do more. I'm going to throw in with them.
They got money. And I completely, I love this idea that we are also, as heathens, we are also in community with people who don't necessarily share our faith, or our particular faith. But one of the things that that helps me in those communities, or move in those communities, especially Christian communities, is finding those places of overlap where we do share values. And I want to just quote, there's one passage out of Matthew that I quote a lot, and Lauren, you might know this from your history. I cannot remember chapter and verse, but it's the one where it says, that which you've done for the least of that which you did for the least of us, you did for me. So
whatever you've whatever you've done to the least of these, you have done to me.
To me. Right. I was hungry and you fed me. I was in prison and you came and visited me. That passage. And I like to highlight this to heathens because it is very similar to the framing of the poem of the Havamal. The Havamal, lots of heathens like to read it for the content, right? These aphorisms on life and stuff, but fewer of them actually look at the frame of it, where it's a stranger has come to your door, and he's saying that the only thing he has to give you is wisdom. So he has nothing, right? He has no treasures, no payment, nothing to give you besides his words and his wisdom. And eventually you find out through the course of the evening that you've just invited God in. You've invited Odin to sit with you, and you now get to share in his wisdom. But that's part of it. You are treating the stranger, this strange old man at your door, with hospitality and with welcoming that guest in, and that's part of our value system. And it's that same one that I believe, it's that same sentiment that's reflected in that passage from the book of Matthew, is that which you do to the least of us, you've done to me. How you treat the stranger is how you treat God, in a way. At least that's the framing of the Havamal. And I look at that as being a way that we can create cross community with Christians. And it has actually been surprisingly good. You quote scripture at a Christian and they like it, apparently.
I agree. And I think that one of the other ways we can often, we can absolutely relate to them and say, listen, we share these values, we share these goals. And, you can often talk about the Good Samaritan with them. The Good Samaritan is another great story when working with Christians, because Samaritans are, we are certainly the Samaritans to them. We are the outsiders. And I think that is a story that often resonates with them. But the fact of the matter is, we are, there are so many ways that we can do so many things to work and make our communities better, whether that community is small or large. I do think that we as a heathen, so I'm going to kind of go in for a minute and talk about why at the end of the day we're talking about this. And that is because we are intrinsically tied together by weird. we are intrinsically tied together by our own interactions with everyone else. We have this idea of the fate that comes from the choices we make. And community is defined by that. And so by being a part of our communities, whether it is a community like the Troth, whether it's a kindred, whether it's your neighborhood association, or whether it's just existing in a city or a town or a farm, because let's be honest here, to me, community also can include animals. And, something I am doing as part of my greater community, and my mother-in-law are bonding over this, is we are converting our landscaping to native landscaping to help the local wildlife. To me, that is also our community, is the local wildlife. And so to me, we have to be good stewards of our weird. And being involved in your community is being a good steward of your weird, however that plays out. And so we cannot, the idea of being a tribalist, of only caring about yours and me and mine, or being someone who only cares about white people or whatever, is impossible. It's just impossible. It's if you are a heathen and you believe in the heathen worldview, it's impossible.
Right. And if you believe in the wider effects of your actions, there's no way that you can simply say, well, my actions are only going to affect my tribe. I'm only going to take actions that only affect my tribe. You can't do that. There's simply no way to live in such a way where you accomplish that, where you accomplish a goal of being so divorced from the rest of the world and the rest of that well of action into which all of our action goes, and to produce the future. Thank you, bow shots. So that you can't be so divorced from that you get to choose whether or not your action affects the greater world around us. You can't move a stone without affecting the greater world around you. You can't breathe a whiff of air without affecting the world around you. It's to tie it back to the pandemic. You can't sneeze without affecting the greater world around you. It is simply not possible. And to delude oneself into thinking that we are not intrinsically tied together in relation with all other things is to me the height of illusion and anti-community at the end of the day, because it denies the very fabric of reality.
I think we'll go to the neighborhood idea, because I think I have a good analogy for this. Let's say you choose, for whatever reason, you make a choice, and your house becomes in disrepair. Now, because your house is in disrepair, this is now going to affect the value of your neighbor's houses, affect the value of your neighborhood. It has been shown when that happens, you're more likely to see crime rates go up. Now, if crime rates go up in that neighborhood, that means crime rates are going to go up citywide, because that neighborhood is now part of the city. And so you may have an instance where a major employer may not want to come to your city and provide jobs because of the crime rate, which then causes more unemployment, which causes the crime rate to go up even more. So one small decision can have a huge impact. And I think that it's important to, it's nothing we do is in isolation. It's just not logical. It makes no sense.
And I also, just from another perspective on that, not just the choices that we make. So with the house analogy, let's say that I see that my neighbor's house that my neighbor has fallen on hard times, right? That my neighbor is that their house is falling apart. More and more stuff is getting thrown onto the lawn for sale. And I see they're having hard times, and I do nothing, right? And I say it's their problem. It's their problem, not mine, right? I'm going to take care of me and mine. They got to live with what they got to live with. As you said, everything that happens to that house is going to be visited on me. All the things that, like, all that stuff, the consequences of that, of my lack of care, of our neighborhood, and also our neighborhood's lack of care, right? Because it's not just me who sees the neighbor falling on hard times. It's everyone around us. It's that indifference to the suffering of our neighbor, which is the real, I think, the real thing that's being reflected here. The real, if we want to say sin, we want to use that word. I'll just use the real.
No, I think that's an appropriate word.
The real woe being visited here is the indifference of not just me, but everyone around me, to the suffering of that person who's fallen on hard times. We could, if we wanted to, probably get together and help fix up this person's house. We probably could get together and help this person out, but we don't. We don't, because of that atomized, individualistic worldview. We turn our heads and say it's not our problem, until one day it does become our problem, right? It becomes my problem when I go and try and sell my house, and now my indifference has cost me $30,000 in equity value, right? Like, mm-hmm. if I'm looking at it in terms of self-harm, it has cost me. So yes, eventually that indifference, that woe that you put into that well of weird, comes back to you.
Yes. And, it is one of those situations that we have to be mindful, and also, that neighbor who's fallen on hard times, you could build a meaningful and beautiful relationship by helping them, even if you don't mm-hmm. share a faith or share values. The fact of the matter is, I'll be honest here, if you go over and help that neighbor learns you're heathen, you've suddenly created a positive impact on someone, not just for you, but for every heathen out there.
That's right.
They're going to think, oh, heathens are great. That's what I want in the world. I want people mm-hmm. to see heathens and think heathens are helpful. Heathens are amazing. So Ben, let's go ahead and we got a couple questions I want to get to.
We do.
So I'm going to go ahead. I got these saved throughout the stream. So I'm going to go ahead and let's see if I can remember how to do this. I'm going to start with not really a question, but I do want to show this one because this was kind of something that I experienced. Thank you guys so much for your frankness and vulnerability in discussing this. I also came into heathenry through Culture of the Teutons and listening to heathen talks. Thank goodness, Lauren, for balancing podcasts out some and acknowledging those past concepts we've internalized, even as we've moved past and actively work into more inclusive, welcoming selves and communities is difficult. And I agree, like it is difficult. I still hold to if you're not slightly embarrassed with how you practiced heathenry 5 years ago, you're doing it wrong. Mm-hmm. And that's just a sign of growth, really. I mean, that really to me is just a sign of growth. And I think as long as you're growing, you're still alive. And that's, I think, the most important thing. So we've got a question. Yeah, I got a question here from Alex Tremo del Norte. What's the difference between the Troth and the Ásatrú Folk Assembly? And we got the second one. We'll hit the first one. It was a lot. I will say the most important thing, the Troth is a religious service and education organization. The Ásatrú Folk Assembly is a church. That's the big on paper difference. First of all, we are not a church. Second, our values. The Ásatrú Folk Assembly is bigoted and racist, and we are not. We are inclusive. We believe that everyone, honestly, I'm going to put it this way because I think it's the better way to put it. We are not so arrogant to think we understand who the gods call. And that's the big difference. And then also just in the ways we operate. I mean, there's a ton of differences, but I mean, the biggest, we don't share the same values and we're not the same kind of organization. I think that's the best way I can explain it. Wire Freya Aswin and Edward Thorson.
We simply do not share the same basic core values as that organization.
And I would argue to a great degree, we don't even share a lot of the same religious practices. I think if you really want to get more into this, if you'll go to heathenhistory.com, there's actually a 2-part podcast episode on Steve McNallen and the AFA, and listen to that. And I go into a lot of it, but it's really not something I can explain in like 10 minutes or even 5 minutes. That's like a 3-hour conversation. Wire Freya Aswin and Edward Thorson no longer are the Troth. And there's a little more to that basically asks wasn't Edred like one of the founders? So Edred quit the Troth in the early 90s because he and several other members were accused of being Satan worshipers. And keep in mind, this was during the Satanic Panic. So he quit the Troth along with several other members after. They were members of a group called Temple of Set, which had some ties to theistic Satanism. And so they quit, and Frey Aswin took over as president. Or not Frey Aswin, I'm sorry.
Prudence took over.
Prince Priest took over. I saw Frey Aswin's in front of me, so that's where my brain went. Prince Priest took over. Frey Aswin was removed from the organization due to violations of our policies. And that's pretty much it. I really, to go in more than that would be violating her privacy and ours, but just to say her public statements were not in line with our values. As such, she was removed as a member. And that happens. I mean, we do unfortunately have to. I don't like removing people as members. Like, none of us do. Unfortunately, it has to happen sometimes because people do change, their values change. And if you say things that are anti-trans, anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim, whatever, you will be removed from the organization if you're publicly saying that stuff. I think it's just how it is, especially if you're an elder or an officer.
Saying it either, but
right, but we can't really.
Yeah, but that you would.
Yeah,
that's someone, especially of Frey Aswin's stature, both within the greater worldwide heathen community and her long history with the Troth. Would say a thing that she, the comments that she said, is damaging. It's certainly damaging, and it's hurtful, and it's not something that we support. And this or that we can tolerate, right? And this not only goes for the biggest, the big names, but it sometimes happens that other members, sometimes questions or comments come to our attention as well. That can happen. Like if you are publicly out as a member of the Troth and you're saying something that's so very against what we stand for and what we're trying to stand for, unfortunately, that's what happens. You won't be part of the organization.
And and I will say, when you join the organization, you sign a statement saying this is there's a certain statement that you sign basically saying that you're not going to be a bigot. And if you are, then we can remove you. That's you have violated the terms and conditions, essentially. People really should read the terms and conditions, maybe. I don't know. All right, we have another question here. Was the original heathenry of ancient Germanic tribes supportive of trans? And the answer is we don't really know. A lot of these, okay, so you're talking about societies that span thousands of years over thousands of miles. And none of them had a really good written record. So what we have to go on is we have what's in the archaeologic record. We have records from other people, and we have records from other people who are outside of that, and then we have things that were written down after Christianization. So we can infer ideas about certain places, certain times, but the actual answer is we don't know, and I don't think there's ever a way for us to definitively know. We do know that there were plenty of people who transgressed what we think are gender norms, and that there were not hard, rigid gender roles as we understand them in all of those times. That's what we know for sure, and that's based on archaeology and grave goods. What we don't know is what they actually believed and how it worked. We just don't, because no one wrote anything down.
Yeah, and I'm just going to say 100% yes, they're absolutely supportive. I mean, to me, because history is read and interpreted by us, right? And as Reconstructionists, or as people who are inspired by the past rather than trying to serve the past, we have to at some point sit here and say, even if it were the case, Like, even if it were the case that we found that this was a trans hating society or whatever, if we were to find that out, I would not do that, right? I don't think any of us would sit there and go, well, guess I got to be anti-trans now. I don't think any of us, even if someone were to find a journal written by some Viking person from, you know, the 800s, and it writes down in detail, like, this is what I believe, I don't think that most people would sit there and say, yep, I'm gonna go ahead and be anti-trans now. It's just not gonna happen. And I think that regardless of what the history says, I think we are morally compelled now to adopt the positions we've adopted, because of the values that we have.
Exactly. So I'm going to show this regarding the modern Troth of the AFA, which is the continuation of the original Troth. So the Troth, this organization, the Troth now, was incorporated in 1987 in Texas as a nonprofit. It has only been one organization. The modern AFA is a continuation of the Ásatrú Free Assembly, which was an organization incorporated in California, I believe the original one was. I don't remember, though. I should know. Lord, I'm a historian on this. That came about because as a reaction to, and around it was reincorporated as a reaction to essentially the Troth being at the time what they would call a universalist organization. It was a reaction to an organization that actually allowed non-white people to worship the gods. But the Troth has been a continuous organization since 1987. And we are actually the same organization. Like, there has been no break in organization. It is the same organization. When they left, new people simply took over those positions. The Troth is a organization led by a board of directors and a president. So those are elected positions, which means that those people are going to change every year. It's a 3-year term, and we elect three new people every year. So those people are going to change every year at Trothmoot, and the president will change every 3 years. We'll at least have an election every 3 years. So we are the same organization that we have been since 1987. We've just had leadership continuously change. And I think that's important for us because I personally, one of the things that drew me to the Troth over other organizations was the change in leadership, because I grew up around cults of personality in regard to religion, and that was a big turnoff for me. So we are the exact same organization. We did move our state of incorporation to New York in the mid 2000s. And we are still incorporated now in New York State instead of Texas. And that is mostly just because it's easier to find, it's just easier to incorporate a nonprofit in New York State, and it's easier to find legal representation in New York State for a pagan nonprofit. It's easier to find, what do they call them? Someone to basically be your person of record. I can't remember what it's called. We have one. But yeah, the person, what?
I don't know, not a secretary.
No, it's basically the person. It's like your person of record, like that they can serve if you get sued.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
You're basically a person who can act as like your power of attorney for those things. Mm-hmm. It's just easier to find that in New York State than it is to find that in somewhere in the South for a non-Christian group. So mm-hmm. That is why we did move, but it's the same organization, same nonprofit. We have the same EIN and nonprofit number we've always had with the federal government of the United States. We do have some branches that have kind of changed. For instance, there used to be a Troth Germany. That is now its own separate group that has spun off, and they are their own individual organization. So, but we are the same group. Nothing has changed about that. So that is kind of how that all works. People, you're talking about how trans would be classed as ergi. That is a lot of the information we have on ergi is very much stuff that was recorded by monks and priests after Christianization. So we have to take it with a pound of salt. A lot of things of what we understand about what have been evil, it's kind of like witchcraft. A lot about what we know as what is witchcraft in pre-Christian times is actually from books that were written by priests of rules that which things you can't do because they're witchcraft, right? So a lot of them are very fanciful because they're just kind of their ideas about what witches were, or is kind of the same concept. A lot of it is definitely what Christians thought was bad. So you have to remember when you look at the sagas, the Eddas, even a lot of the records we have, they were all written down hundreds of years after Christianization by Christians, people who were often classically educated, and often their experience with pagan came strictly from Greek and Roman. So they're also trying to like impose Greek and Roman ideas in addition to Christianity on top of Norse mythology. That's why you see this desperate try to have like one unified pantheon, which isn't exactly something you can do because thousands of years, thousands of miles, tons of tribes, it doesn't really work.
Yeah, pantheon's more of a conceit than an actual existing thing. Like when someone built, when the Romans or the Greeks built a pantheon, it was more like, yeah, these are the only gods that matter, right? Like this is all the gods that actually are worth anything, right? They're all in here. This is our collection, right? It was a bit of a conceit on their behalf to say like, this is the known world. This is everything. This is everything worth knowing is here. Whereas today, we even like the word pantheon itself kind of gives me a little bit of like, I don't know about that, because it just doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense, because we're never going to have a truly pantheon. We're just never going to know. And speaking of never know, because the literature that we have to analyze the laws, the thing that ends up getting lost in all of it through all these different reinterpretations is we are never going to know why. We are never going to have the reasoning or the rationale behind why certain words were used, or certain concepts, or why they treated certain people certain ways. We are never going to know why pre-Christian people did things the way they did things. That is lost. The why has been stripped out of every. So like we might know when a holiday was. This usually comes up with holidays. Like we might know when a holiday was, but we don't know why they celebrated it that way. We guess, like with harvest, for example, we guess it's because the wheat harvest was coming in, but they might have had a story for that. They might have been a whole story for why they celebrate certain things on certain days, but that's all gone. All gone.
Well, I think a really great example is the use of eggs around Erstra. And we've talked about this, and this is actually something that's kind of worked our way into my kindred lore. And we don't know this for certain, but what we do know is if you look at how chickens lay eggs without artificial light, this is the time when there's just enough light, chickens are actually start to be spurned to lay eggs. And so the time right before this is the extremely hungry time because there's not a lot of protein. And so eggs might be the first actual protein you've gotten in several weeks. So eggs really became the sign of fertility and joy and sacredness because you're hungry. You're real hungry, and here's some protein finally that you can eat. And so eggs were something to really be celebrated. Now, did that mean that's absolutely true? No, but does that mean that that's something our kindred kind of accepts as spiritually true? Yes. Because to me, there's true, and then there's, that seems right. That's spiritually true, and that's, but I don't expect anyone else to take that as true. Eggs are great. I mean, I just expect, that's just my kindred and what we've, over, I'm kind of like you, 20 years in a kindred, you kind of just start having your own kind of mythology pop up in a way. And so I do think that's important.
And it's a story on top of a story, right? Like why we think that we think it's this way because that's how we've experienced it. The truth is we don't know. I think it's likely there were stories behind why things were celebrated in certain ways, or why Blot was conducted in the way that they conducted it, which again, we don't quite know how they did it.
Nope. We have one passage that kind of explains it.
Yeah, that kind of explains from someone who never saw it, right?
Yeah,
it ends up becoming the Reconstructionist case. You're building a religion as told by people who never practiced it and who never saw it and who didn't believe it, and some of whom would be really angry if they found out someone were actually. Hey, I'm looking at you, Saxo.
I always say we're basically creating a religion based on a game of telephone.
Yeah, and telephone from people who weren't even on the original call, right?
Yeah.
It's very hard for us to figure, and it's the why of it that escapes us, and it's the why of it that we end up having to furnish with our own stories and our own values and our own justifications. And and here's the thing, that is the way we will always do it, whether someone's telling you that, well, these modern pagans, they don't really look at the real pre-Christian stuff, they're imposing their values on it, they're not reading the values from the people. No, you're reading them, you're imposing values on them and taking from them the values that you want to take, right?
I call those people edibators.
Yeah, or an editor, or someone who says like, oh, they just don't want to acknowledge the truths of the ancient time. What truths exactly? You end up finding that what they're doing is they're reading that in to the story. They're bringing that in, and they're bringing it in because usually they're very dissatisfied with the modern world. They're upset. They feel lonely. They feel like they would have been better off born in a different age, born in a different time. And it's unfortunate that they feel that way.
I feel like I would have been better off born during like Star Trek time, but that's just me.
No, I mean, they wouldn't.
Yeah. Then I could see better, but that's neither here nor there. So we will be back next week. It may not be us. The idea of this show is it is a rotating panel of hosts. And so you never know who's going to pop up, but we will be back each week. We're going to cover a different topic. And I'll be honest, we haven't quite decided what we're talking about next week. I personally would like to talk about all of the plethora of winter holidays coming up, because I was joking. I was talking with my coworker who is pagan friendly, and I'm like, I feel like from now until January, I am just constantly celebrating something. It's just because I was working on the Troth calendar, right? The layout, and it's like there's 3 months with nothing. And then all of a sudden from September to January, it's like a party. So I am, and part of that is because, there's a lot of reasons for that. So I would like to talk about that, but we're just going to have to see. But we will be doing this weekly. And like I said, panel show, you're going to see a lot of diverse opinions. It won't just be mine and Ben's faces here. So
thank goodness. For all of you out here to not have to see this face every single week. Maybe this voice is fine. The Connecticut NPR voice is good. Good for you to fall asleep to, I guess. Yeah,
you need to start doing some ASMR.
Yeah, there you go.
Like sleep stuff, like sagas, ASMR sagas. But until next week, if you are interested in our organization and all the great things we do, including InReach, Heathens in Recovery, and all of the other great programs, you can go to our website at thetroth.org and see everything that we do. We have a wonderful website that we just launched back in June, a brand new website. So if you visited in the past and not seen this, you're in for a big shock. We also happen to have the largest library of heathen information on the internet right now. So check that out if you want to learn more about holidays, gods, goddesses, rituals, etc. And we have a lot of great stuff coming up. And if you have questions, you can reach out to us through the website. I'm always happy to chat with anybody. And from there, from me to you, everybody have a wonderful week. And we will see you same saga time, same saga channel.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.